If you enjoy our work, consider making a donation to mixtapestories.net or at Patreon/mixtapestories, all one word. Thank you. Mixtape Stories, creating beautiful fiction in a disappointing timeline. In 1986, with the global economy in ruins, the Americans and the Soviets were ready to launch a full-scale nuclear exchange when the United Gray Consortium stepped in, made first contact, and brought the escalation to a halt. In the years since, Greys and other races of the consortium explored Earth to experience its many authentic, primitive cultures. They discovered the miraculous elixir, coffee. Brad, a Gray who initially came to Earth as a volunteer, immigrated to New Orleans with a plan to export coffee from Earth to the civilized worlds in the consortium. There was only one problem. The consortium did not allow coffee imports, since they saw it as a drug requiring decades of study. With an addictive product, eager customers, but no legal way to sell it, Brad takes a page from his human friends. Join us for Smuggler's Blues by Michael Juge.
When I first laid my orbs on the statue, I had difficulty making sense out of it. It showed a human of sorts, a female, but she had 4 arms. I've been on Earth long enough to know that humans only had 2, like us Greys. Adorned with a necklace of skulls, the female posed as though she were in the middle of a dance. My orbs glistened as I examined the figure, not only for its aesthetic qualities, but to search for any blemishes that would cheapen it. The statue stood about my height, 138 centimeters or 4'9" in American. Indeed, I am tall for a Gray, aren't I? The artist followed me as I inspected it.
What do you think?
Her voice echoed in the warehouse. Like all humans, she had a wide, carnivorous mouth to communicate with me vocally, because, like most other fellow primates, humans didn't possess telepathy like us. I approximated a smile with my slit mouth. What is it called?
Kali. She's an Indian goddess.
Native American art, I surmised. She shook her head.
No, not Native American. Indian.
Years after arriving here, I was still struggling with all the nuances of English. While all the stakeholders in the United Gray Consortium have a network flowing throughout our bodies to translate all known languages, I chose to not have it translate English into a Gray telepathic standard, as the networks translate words, not expressions or cultural context. For a race with little in the way of genetic diversity, whose civilization was a mere 7,000 years old at best, humans managed to create a baffling tapestry of cultures. Granted, it's one of the reasons why I loved it here, but it was also what made it so confusing to communicate sometimes. I turned to her. Are you from India? I asked, with my network, which vibrated the air to form the words. While I could understand English on my own, my little slit mouth simply can't form the words.
I was born here, but my parents are from India.
And this Kali is your goddess? She canted slightly.
She's one of many deities in the Hindu faith. Kali is the goddess of time, destruction, and of liberation of the ego.
No shit, I replied. It took years, but I managed to teach my network to say shit, as it's a versatile word in English used all the time. The artist seemed to appreciate it.
I'm sorry. It's just that I've never met a Gray who curses.
I trilled slightly, a chuckle to humans. I imagine you have not met many Grays at all, she nodded.
Off-worlders aren't common in the States, and they're even rarer in New Orleans.
That was true enough. Since first contact, several Terran nations chose to incorporate into the United Gray Consortium. It's not like humanity was living the Star Trek dream when we arrived. I still get those two confused. Earth was hurting, so it only made sense that dozens of these tribes chose to join a proper civilization, leaving their own primitive ways that led to war, crime, and poverty behind, and no longer be subject to the whims of the two super tribes of the United States and the Soviet Union. But neither of the aforementioned super tribes chose to incorporate themselves. As a result, most Greys, Trilithians, Chifuncta, and other races from the consortium didn't bother visiting America. Too wild. I stood on the stepladder to get a better look at the top of the statue. As instructed, the artist had a hole 18 centimeters in diameter that opened into a hollow interior. I tested the plaster skin of Kali. It was a little thin, but it should suffice. Kali was impressive. It should not only do well in carrying my product, it'll go for a nice price on the market. I rubbed my almost non-existent chin. The plaster will require a sealant I use, which I will deduct from the total price. I am willing to purchase it for $5,000. She blanched, and we commenced our requisite haggling and arrived at $10,000. When we settled on the price, I wrote her a check, and my network whistled as I said, "Okay, boys, fill her up." One of the employees pulled over a duct and secured it over the hole atop of Kali, and proceeded to send a flow of coffee grinds into the statue. By the existentiality, I love the smell of coffee in the morning. After we sealed the top of Kali and put it alongside the other statues, I climbed into my Corvette. My first car was a Toyota Corolla. As it was designed for human adults, I had to rig it with a foot pedal extenders and a booster seat. But my new Corvette was a custom job. My family back on Umbara would say that this was ostentatious, that if I needed to use a human's primitive conveyance, that I should at least purchase a vehicle that didn't consume so much caustic fuel. And they'd be right. As a responsible Gray, I should purchase one of the new fusion vehicles being produced in the recently incorporated domain of Korea. But first of all, there aren't many helium-3 fueling stations in America. Secondly, none of the fusion vehicles can roar like a Corvette. It was a short drive from the warehouse to the French Quarter. Walking down the sidewalk, I was greeted by shopkeepers.
Sup, Brad? How they hanging?
I am unable to complain.
Yeah, you're right.
Other people gave me a sup chin nod. I vaguely recognized some of the people walking by, but to be honest, it's difficult to distinguish individual humans unless I really know them.
Hey, Brad!
Nelson, the owner of Kagan's, called out from the bar next door. Greetings! How are they hanging? For some reason, the network just doesn't do contractions. I could teach it to curse, but no joy on contractions. Go figure. Nelson smiled.
Can't complain. The Saints are actually winning.
Yes, you are right. The local football team had been doing unusually well this season. I don't know why they call it football here. The rest of the planet plays a different game, and it too is called football. But it makes sense for them to call it that, as they move the ball around by kicking it with their feet. Not so with American football. I don't know. Miles, ounces, football. It's just another one of these things that make Americans even more inscrutable to the consortium than the rest of humanity. When I walked into Caldi's, the smell of coffee nearly overtook me. Our plug little noses have very limited sense of smell, with one exception, coffee. There's something about it. We Greys can sense its aroma every bit as much as any human with their massive honkers. A few tourists gawked as I walked in. In the far corner were two Trillethians. They're second-tier stakeholders, meaning they're just shy of the Grey status. Like humans, they communicate vocally and are voracious meat eaters. I've been seeing more Trillethians in town lately. A good sign.
Morning, Brad.
The barista called out. Greetings, Beth. It is indeed a lovely morning, seeing as the Saints defeated the Falcons quite convincingly. Beth didn't seem to be impressed by the news.
I wouldn't know, really.
Beth is what they call goth. She always dresses in all black, dyes her hair black. She even has black fingernails. Fingernails are fascinating, by the way. I wish we Greys didn't lose them. Apparently, one of the commandments of being goth is to have a perpetually dour disposition and to neither play nor discuss sports. And they have to play Skinny Puppy or The Cure at least once a day during work hours. Beth made me an Americano and slid it across the bar over to me. I took a sip and closed my orbs. By the existentiality, it was good. It took me back to when I had my first cup of coffee. It was shortly after I arrived on Earth 5 years ago. I had just graduated from secondary school. Full disclosure, my grades were not particularly impressive. I was always getting distracted, gazing out of the windows, looking at one of the ancient space elevators that were still in use hauling material. While in school, a friend turned me on to a recently published book entitled A Violent and Musical People. It was a memoir by Robin House 1426. She was a junior service representative and the principal advisor to Regional Manager Bob House 001, who introduced the United Gray Consortium to humanity at first contact a couple of years earlier. Normally, the consortium would never have made first contact with a primitive race from a rear water like Earth. But the two super tribes of the United States and the Soviet Union had a nuclear incident a few years earlier. A U.S. sub accidentally launched a nuclear missile into the Soviet city of Krasnodar, and the Soviets leveled the American city of Cleveland in response. The nuclear exchange might have been limited, but over the next 3 years, the world economy completely collapsed, and the two super tribes were about to launch a full-scale nuclear war. And that's when Regional Manager Bob decided to step in. The arrival of a fleet over the UN Secretariat halted the escalation and began the era of incorporation for humanity. Bob's advisor for this first contact was Robin, who was fresh out of the university, having defended her dissertation on humanity. After first contact, Robin served in the relief efforts in Canada, as the people who lived in Toronto were downwind of the nuclear fallout from Cleveland. She partnered with a human named Jake, and together they worked to help evacuees from Toronto, who now lived in the hastily erected community of Maple Leaf, outside of Calgary. While most reports on humanity portrayed a violent child race in need of mentorship, Robin described these people as compassionate, resilient, and enormously creative people who composed incredible music and other works of art. I had been inspired by Robin's memoir, and seeing that my grades wouldn't get me into a decent university, I joined the consortium's relief efforts on Earth, where young stakeholders could serve in the Office of Lesaminary Efforts, or as the humans call it, the Office of Good Intentions. And I got my dream assignment in Canada, the same domain where Robin served. By the time I arrived, though, Canada had been a fifth-tier stakeholder for a couple of years, so it wasn't like the wilderness of the early days when Robin served. I found myself among thousands of volunteers from the primary stakeholder races. Local grocery stores in Edmonton and Calgary sold protein paste on the shelves for us Greys. Trilithian and Chefunctators were packing Vancouver to sample foreign meats and a thing called cheese. I wanted to be helpful to these desperate people, but I was also hoping to be somewhere more authentically wild. So I took a weekend trip to the nearby city of Seattle. I was strolling down a dingy section called Belltown when I was struck by an incredible aroma from the store across the street. A human behind a counter with ill-kept hair and grungy-looking clothes was working some steam-powered contraption. He or she was initially shocked by my presence, but when I asked what that incredible aroma was, they grinned widely and proceeded to pour me a cup of that piping hot black liquid and said, "Hey man, welcome to Earth. It's on the house." I took a whiff, and despite my fear of being singed, I tentatively took a sip. And it changed my life. The bold taste was stronger than any drink I've ever had. Unlike alcohol, this coffee didn't make me intoxicated. Quite the opposite. I was alert, and I felt a sense of purpose. I soon learned that this thing called coffee was available everywhere, and it was consumed daily by humans all over the world. I had to have more. When I returned to Canada, I started frequenting the nearest Tim Hortons. I introduced it to the other volunteers, Greys, Trilithians, Umchakums. They all loved it too. When I completed my tour with the Office of Good Intentions, instead of boarding the orbital shuttle or flying saucer that would take me to the C-32 Interstellar bound for Umbara, I decided to stay. I took a Greyhound, no relation, to Seattle and got a job at the very same coffee house, which allowed me to study the industry. I read the invoices and mailers, where I learned that the varieties of coffee being sold here were sourced from the port of New Orleans. I was illegally present in the U.S., but the new Dukakis administration wanted to show a greater openness to the consortium than his predecessor Ronald Reagan by allowing more aliens with skills and money to immigrate. I took a flight to New Orleans, and I spent the rest of my savings to purchase Caldi's, and with that, I was able to secure permanent legal residency as a business owner employing Americans. New Orleans had been in a poor economic condition even before the catastrophic events that led to first contact. Rampant crime, corrupt politicians, no industry outside of tourism. It's more humid than should be physically possible, and it's home to flying roaches, which just so happens to be the most terrifying organism I ever encountered. But despite all of this, the people were extraordinarily welcoming. I first experienced this while gassing up my car, and a guy one stall over waved and said, "Hey, where you at?" which I came to understand was the local greeting. At first I thought he was just an anomaly, but then it happened again. I was at a checkout lane at a grocery store buying tofu for my protein, and the clerk smiled.
"Hey, darling, you know they got Zatarans on sale. You should buy a box to give that tofu some taste. My daughter's a vegetarian and she puts Zatarans on everything."
I never encountered such chattiness before. Honestly, I found it a little unsettling, but I went with it. When she gave me the receipt, she added,
"Say hi to your mama and them."
"It's like nobody minded that I was an alien. They were more concerned with whether I was calling my mom frequently. Likewise, the members of the French Quarter Association went out of their way to help ensure that Caldi's prospered, as they didn't want it turning into another t-shirt shop. It didn't take long before I started seeing a few adventurous off-world tourists coming into Caldi's. There was the occasional Gray, but most were Trelethians. They heard that the food scene in New Orleans was unique, and they ate it up. If you're rolling your orbs or your eyes over my pun, you should know that the Trelethians' entire culture is the equivalent of a never-ending dad joke. I don't know what it is about those barrel-bodied people, but Trelethians love stupid jokes as much as they love consuming meat, which gave me an idea. I started printing t-shirts and put them up for sale in the coffee house, fitted specifically for Trelethians. One showed an image of Earth, and above it, it said in Treleth, "I traveled 20 light years to Earth, and all I got was a stupid t-shirt." Another showed a crawfish with the text, "I like to suck head and eat tail." The Grays could not understand the double entendre because the network simply couldn't translate meaning. But the Trelethian tourists would roar with laughter and buy them in bulk. I single-handedly created the t-shirt trend taking place on Treleth today. Along with the food and suggestive t-shirts, the off-worlders would rave about New Orleans coffee. Some tourists suggested that along with selling t-shirts and coffee mugs shaped like a human tit, that it would be great if I could also sell them packed coffee for stasis as well. There was one problem. The United Gray Consortium had strict rules about exporting consumables. So far, only soybeans and rice could be authorized to be imported into the consortium by the Consumable and Medicinal Bureau. Coffee and its active ingredient caffeine was completely new. The CMB said that they needed 30 years to test the effects of coffee in simulations. 30 years! I couldn't wait 30 years. I had a product and I had a market. I needed to find a way to get coffee to the stakeholders back in the prime world. The idea of how to accomplish this came to me at Nelson's daughter's birthday party. He told her stories about Brad, the gray alien barista, and I agreed to show up on the promise of free booze. They had the usual things at human kids' birthday parties. A dessert made with an obscene amount of sugar, little cone-shaped cardboard hats, and booze for the grown-ups. I was enjoying a Long Island iced tea when Nelson hoisted up a statue up a tree. It was a multicolored figure of an animal, a cow or a mule or a horse, I don't know, some hooved creature. And I was a little more than intoxicated as I instructed my network not to filter out the alcohol. Whatever the art piece was meant to represent, it was beautiful. A truly magnificent, multicolored gift. So I was a little perplexed when they blindfolded the birthday girl and handed her a stick. To my horror, she proceeded to beat the living shit out of it. "By the existentiality!" I exclaimed. I stumbled out of the lawn chair, falling through the canvas straps when Nelson held me up.
Brad, relax, bro. It's a piñata.
A piñata? I never heard of such a thing. Nelson explained that it was a traditional Mexican birthday activity. The little barbarian primates took turns abusing the poor effigy of an animal, warping the shape until it broke open. Candies gushed from the gaping chest wound of a papier-mâché beast. The children all cheered as they dove onto the ground, eating Twizzlers and Snickers like beasts tearing into an animal's entrails. After I vomited a day's worth of protein paste, I was struck with an idea. I thought that the piñata was a work of art, a statue. What if I started buying artwork, statues created by human artisans, and sold them to buyers back home? The consortium had strict rules about exporting consumables, but not art. And I would fill these hollow statues with ground coffee and seal the top and make it appear as if the statues weren't hollow. And that's how I started smuggling coffee into the consortium, through modified piñatas. After the coffee grounds are drained at my warehouse back on Umbara, the statue would get refilled, resealed, and then sold at auction, where I made a killing. Along with illicit coffee, everyone back home was getting into authentic savage art. Piñatas were proudly displayed by the wealthy to show that they were both rich and avant-garde, while secretly serving their guests coffee. There were a bunch of upfront costs to the business of smuggling. I had to commission artists to create hollow statues with concealable holes at the top and bottom according to my specifications. Then I had to ship it to a port with a consortium terminal to get it onto an orbital that would be transferred to a C-32 Interstellar and then to another warehouse on Umbara. That meant hiring employees on Umbara and bribing a lot of consortium employees along the way. And believe me, finding officers employed by the consortium willing to break the rules was not easy. But I did find willing accomplices. They didn't want money. They wanted a guaranteed supply of coffee available to them for when they returned back to their home worlds. Along with everyone getting some cut of the proceeds, I also had to pay the US government taxes on all of my earnings. Uncle Sam knew what I was doing, but they weren't going to share that with the consortium. I think they liked seeing someone getting one over them. As this was Louisiana, I also had to pay a lot of backsheesh to the governor, as well as the mayor, and to the comptroller, the guys over at the docks. And let's not forget the mafia. Don't ever forget about the mafia. I also contributed to several politicians' campaigns. I could see my parents' orbs turning magenta with shame. But they have to understand, this isn't the consortium. This is how business is done. The money was rolling in, so much so that I had to start donating it. My liver couldn't fathom how I could have so much abundance while others had so little. So I set up the Brad Foundation, where I funneled most of my profit, which supported the Orleans Parish schools, and I set up scholarships to pay for college tuition. I often went to the Saints games with friends from the quarter, and started going to weekly services over at St. Francis Cabrini. I wasn't Catholic or anything, but I enjoyed the music as well as the accoutrements of religion. Grays have nothing like this anymore. I recently joined the crew at Orpheus, where I got to meet several musicians, and last year I was elected president of the French Quarter Association. It had been years since I'd been home, and I never even visited my warehouse on Umbara. It was time that I met with some of my colleagues on the downstream side. I had to take a suborbital flight from New Orleans to Mexico City in order to get a flying saucer to rendezvous to Orbital Hub 1, a mammoth space station in geostationary orbit that served as a way station for a space elevator under construction. The graphene filaments were spindling down towards Earth and should meet near the surface in Brazil in about a year. The space elevators back home were obsolete, constructed back when Homo sapiens were saying their goodbyes to their Neanderthal cousins. So it was like going back in time to see one under construction. On the approach to the hub, the shuttle passed near the Binational Space Station, a joint U.S.-Soviet effort. It was a dinky little thing. A couple of modules strung together, hurtling in low Earth orbit like some glorified escape pod. But it was nice seeing these once bitter rivals become allies. President Dole went so far as to officially declare the Cold War to be over. The cruel summer of the 1980s was giving way to a promise in the 1990s. The shuttle docked at Orbital Hub 1 where I was reintroduced to Umbara standard gravity. It's 11% higher than on Earth, which isn't much, but to me, it suddenly felt oppressive. I walked down the corridor of the terminal towards the gate for the C-32 Interstellar bound for Umbara, passing by an atrium looking down towards Earth below. The blue marble was a beautiful sight. While walking past other travelers, I realized that I was among the majority again. Greys dominated the atrium. There were a handful of humans as well. Some were helium-3 miners, either heading to or from the moon, while others were a contingent of human soldiers. They were part of the Gray Defense Force's brand new Human Corps of Volunteers. Composed of humans from the stakeholder provinces, these new recruits wanted adventure and to keep freedom-loving primates safe from the cephalopodic nihilists of the Obsidian Order. As these humans had never been off-world, I couldn't help but wonder how they'll manage the first time they see a gigantic squid in armor running straight for them. I was waiting in line at the gate to board the Interstellar when a female telepped,
Brad House, 1326?
I was taken by surprise. It had been a long time since anyone communicated with me in my native telepathic language. I struggled for a second to respond in kind. Yes? I expected it was an associate with Conglomerate Interstellar Services, but the moment I turned around, I knew I was in trouble. The woman wore black coveralls, and my network immediately registered her with the Criminal Investigations Bureau.
I am Agent Barbara House, 874 of the CIB.
The CIB. By the existentiality, the dreaded CIB.
You are under arrest for illicit drug trafficking. You are not required to express any thoughts, and you have the right to counsel. Any utterances can be used against you in trial.
Agent Barbara and her colleagues proceeded to arrest me, which didn't involve handcuffs as my network was forced to comply physically with her orders. As they led me to a private room, without thinking, I made the sign of the cross and started doing the Hail Mary. Barbara looked at me. I guess it's true what they say about atheists and foxholes after all. I might not have been a stellar student in secondary school, but I knew my rights. I kept my thoughts shut. By law, no one was allowed to pry into another Gray's thoughts. Not the cops, not your spouse, nobody. Additionally, I was allowed to choose my counsel. I recalled a phone number from a personal injury lawyer who advertised on TV. Bart Morrison. One call, that's all. He's Bart Morrison and he's on my side. I expressed this to Agent Barbara, who rolled her orbs.
You are attempting to be facetious, are you not?
I had forgotten how stuffy we Grays were. I bristled. The law states that I may choose my own counsel. This is his phone number. You will summon him post-haste, and I shall not be removed from this jurisdiction until I have met with him. Agent Barbara didn't have a choice. She found a terminal that connected to the Terran telephone lines and called the 1-800 number.
Bart Morrison and Associates.
Hello, I am Brad 1326.
Brad, as in Brad the Great Barista?
Why, yes. Yes, I am.
Hi, Brad. I'm Deborah. My sister Amelie, you know her. She sees you every Sunday over at St. Francis Cabrini. And my hairdresser's brother owns the bar next to your coffee house.
Nelson?
Yeah, that's the one. We dated back in high school. Anyway, that's not why you called. What can Bart Morrison do for you today?
I told Deborah what happened and where I was. She was blown away to be speaking with me in space, and she was aghast about my arrest.
Mr. Morrison is at court right now, but I swear on my mama's grave I'll pass this to him as soon as he's out.
Thank you, Deborah. And be sure to say hello to Amelie for me. It's something I learned over the years. Tell someone to say hey to someone else. The following day, I was led into a conference room where a human in a suit stood gawking at the earth below. At first, I thought it was Bart Morrison, but this human had darker skin and close-cropped, tight-curled hair, as opposed to the human I had been seeing on TV. I've gotten pretty good at distinguishing humans by now.
Mr. Brad, I'm Boudreaux Jenkins. I'm a friend of Bart Morrison.
Boudreaux Jenkins. The name sounded familiar. Then my network pulled up the memory. You are the attorney who successfully defended the governor, are you not? I hated how my network wouldn't allow for contractions. Boudreaux nodded.
Governor Edwards sends his thanks for your generous donations.
I know. It sounds awful that I'd contribute to a political campaign of someone who would later be charged with embezzlement. But you gotta understand, this was Earth, Louisiana specifically. Edwin Edwards was running up against a Nazi. And if you read your Terran history, then you know why it was important for me to support Edwards, even if he is a crook.
Bart and I discussed it, and we agreed that it'd be better counsel seeing as Bart's focus is on personal injuries. If you're amenable, I'd like to represent you.
Indeed I am, Mr. Jenkins. Boudreaux confided that he knew little about consortium jurisprudence, but was confident that he was a quick learner. Before he left, he added,
You should also know that everyone back home is up in arms about your arrest.
I raised my non-existent brow.
Bart Morrison's secretary told me of her friends about how you were arrested just for trying to sell coffee to the Grays back on whatever planet you're from. And word about it spread. People throughout the city are raising hell with the feds, demanding they do something to stop the consortium for taking one of their own. Governor Edwards and Senator Bro have sworn they'd bring it to the president's attention.
The orbital shuttle landed at the new gate at Louis Armstrong International Airport. The seams appeared, the hatch opened, and a rush of muggy air wafted into the cabin. I walked down the plank to find dozens of humans cheering. At the end of a red carpet, I was met by Senator Bro, New Orleans Mayor Mark Morial, and Governor Edwards. Welcome home, Ambassador, the mayor greeted. Behind him, people held up signs, some saying, Welcome home, Ambassador Brad. Senator Bro shook my hand. It's good to have you back, Ambassador. It had been a few months since the arrest, which led to an international incident. Deborah's loose lips led to public unrest. Senator Bro and Governor Edwards convinced the president to register his indignation that a permanent resident of the United States was being detained for simply exporting coffee when he personally saw the consortium ambassador to the U.S. imbibe coffee herself. The United Gray Consortium didn't want to further alienate themselves from a country that seemed intent on remaining unincorporated. They also hated looking like hypocrites. I was in my comfy cell on Orbital Hub 1 when I received a visitor along with my attorney, Boudreaux Jenkins. It was none other than Regional Manager Bob House 001 himself, the Gray who initiated first contact almost a decade ago, and who was in charge of this sector. He explained that the international relations were delicate and that I was endangering it with my smuggling, to which Boudreaux objected. Bob then raised his hand.
But be that as it may, I have convinced the prosecutor to drop all charges.
I folded my arms. No shit. Bob took a moment to let his network figure that one out.
There is no excrement involved, Brad House 1326. It has come to our attention that your introduction of coffee, reckless as it has been, might have just provided the consortium with a newfound revenue stream. It appears that this coffee is rather popular throughout the consortium and beyond.
Beyond? By the existentiality. I had no idea my coffee was being smuggled beyond the consortium worlds.
Along with the charges being dropped, we will further allow your art dealing business to continue unimpeded for another 24 months, in exchange for 2 actions on your part. Number 1, you will advise the Department of Commerce in establishing a consortium-managed coffee pipeline with your new wholesalers. Number 2,
I was to quit my day job and become the United Gray Consortium's ambassador to the United States. At first I couldn't believe my ear holes, but Boudreaux looked at me and nodded. I scoffed. Regional manager, while I am most flattered by the offer for such an august position, I must relay that I have not even attended university. I have never served the Consortium Department of Outreach and Foreign Engagement. No less have I ever conducted high-level meetings with national leaders.
in the few short years you have resided in that feral tribe of yours, you amassed more goodwill and more influence than any gray on this planet, myself included. You know these people as well as a certain junior officer who advised me when I made first contact, and you managed to do so without the support of the consortium. And while I am being direct, I must also admit that right now, the president of this feral nation would like nothing more than to force me to appoint a rascal, his words, like yourself, to represent our nation.
So, in other words, you need me, colleague. The regional manager sighed.
Please inform me of your decision within the next day.
Robin House 1426, who wrote A Violent and Musical People, provided an honest assessment of humanity. They were violent. They managed to find ways to other their own people. And yet they were resilient, loving, and they could embrace anyone given the right circumstances. I could not help but believe that no city could imbue humanity onto me the way New Orleans does. It smells, it seeps, and it wraps its arms around you whether you like it or not. I might be an ambassador for the consortium living in D.C., but New Orleans will never leave me. I stepped up to the podium and affected a grin. Only in New Orleans, am I correct?
Mixtape Stories hopes you enjoyed this podcast. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. You can find out more about us on our website, mixtapestories.net.
If you enjoyed this great alien story, check out our first in the series, episodes 3 through 5, entitled Gray Alien's Burden. The role of the grocery clerk and the receptionist was played by Marjorie Trace Juge. The following actors are available on Fiverr. The other male roles were played by Robert C., and Agent Barbara, Beth, and the artist was played by Janika.